Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
And then
you know what? It depends on the person. I mean, no one's the same, and the job is not a cookie cutter. Like, all right, once you get this amount of time on the job, you'll be able to do this. It's not that. It's a DNA makeup. It's your background. It's your personality. It's your, what you can, when you're a rookie, you try to be a sponge. Like one of the things I did, and actually a suggestion from my dad, who was a retired NYPD detective for years in the city. I took one thing of everyone that I worked with that I liked. If I was working with a guy I never knew, I didn't know because I was a rookie and you were in the car for the night, observing one thing he did and then just kind of put it in my Rolodex, and watch. The biggest thing I get asked all the time if I speak it at a college or the academy or whatever, what's the best advice you can give, to a rookie? Watch and listen and grasp what acknowledge experience. You see it, understand, and just watch and listen how things are done. Dan and I, weren't always, okay, confident. Okay, I can go in, I'll flip this guy. It takes years to get to that. And it takes a multitude of places that you end up working, different areas. That's the best thing about the NYPD. The vast amount of different places you can work: narcotics, gang unit, robbery, JTTF, major case. The avenues are vast, but you need to grasp certain things from those experiences, because Dan will say, the King of Clubs case with him and other cases, there's always that one case that you need to take everything you've learned and everything and put it into that case or that interview. And that's how important it is. And that's when okay, I got this. And that's a great feeling when you're at that point in your career where you're confident that you can take that on.
It's awesome. By the way, just kind of dating all of us, I think that when you said, put that into your Rolodex. I mean, there's a few people I imagine that are watching and listening to this that they're like, Rolodex? What the hell is a Rolodex?
Heck, I've already referenced a beeper and a phone booth in this conversation. So yeah.
Yep. Oh my God, that's so true. All right, your notes app on your phone has that.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, if you so I don't know if you guys can see this, but for my birthday last year, my kids bought me this Old Lives Matter glass.
That's great.
Yeah, they're in on it too. So they're all about hammering dad on the gray hair that I've got here. Of course, most of it's from them, but they don't care about that. But no, so just so everybody knows, a Rolodex is when you used to get a business card or somebody's information, you put it on a card, and then it would go on a little wheel, and you could flip it around, and it was all alphabetized and or however you did your categorization there, and so.
That's funny.
Yeah, we've just got notes on your phone, and geez, man. I mean, today's world, you probably have a video for every little Rolodex card that you used to have. So it's, boy, the world's certainly changed. I mean, Dan, even thinking about, some of that information that you were talking about, I'm like, imagine tracking those Chinese guys down with the cell technology that we have now. You could pinpoint their exact location within minutes. Just if even a burner phone, if you have the number, you can track that thing. And so, the ability to solve crime and like what I do with DNA, man, I can provide you guys profiles that you would it'd just blow your mind. So technology is certainly improving, and hopefully the case clearances improves with it. But, back to kind of just the human nature that we were talking about earlier. It's like, I don't think that's ever going to change. It's just one of those things that people are just the carnal nature of people, and opportunities are going to always come about. I think criminals will continue to figure out new ways to scam other people. I actually just did a podcast on what's called sextortion. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that.
Mhm.
You know, where they'll get especially teenagers to take pictures of themselves and send it to somebody they think is just another teenager, but it's in reality a scammer. And then they start using that to basically blackmail the child into sending more pictures and then eventually money. And then, but it's just such a sick practice when you think about it, that you're like, you know, these people are just taking advantage of the naivety of teenagers. And eventually a lot of times the teenager gets so bad that they either run out of money and they get completely hopeless, but the suicide rate from that is just extraordinary. And it's like you completely destroy people's lives without even thinking twice about it. And you know, you don't necessarily have to kill them to really destroy their lives. So
a couple of things you know very clearly as a cop and a detective if you do a career of this. One is that evil does exist in the world. There's lots of it. And it comes in different shapes and forms, and not everybody looks evil on the outside. There's plenty of evil in the world. Second is that evil is clever. True evil is very clever and can fool you and fake you. You understand that there are three types of people, that there are sheeps, that there are wolves and sheepdogs. We're the sheepdogs. Sheeps doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means you go about your life. Most people are sheep. But the wolves, the predators who feed on them, are absolutely there. And a simple case of this can be, I remember being a young cop, living in Queens and taking the subway into Manhattan, which we called the city, you know, just because it was easier than driving in and stuff. If I was going to go to some kind of an event, a hockey game, whatever it was just easier to take the subway. I was right there. I get in the subway, stand in the car, and I always stood. I'd be standing in the corner, holding onto the little hand rest, and I would watch the car. Now, we always had to carry. Off duty in the city, you always had to carry a gun and shield because you're technically on duty at all times. If something happens, you have to do something. You're a sworn officer. You can't ignore a rape or a robbery. You have to do something. So I'm standing there and I'm watching and being a young cop and being aggressive. I'm half wishing something would happen just because I'm like, this would be fun, you know, exciting. So I'm standing there and I watch people get on a car, get off, get on. And most people do what New Yorkers do, which is they pay attention to their own little zone. They got their headphones in back in the time, Walkman. Let's go back to the 80s and talk Walkmans. And they're just paying attention to their own little world. Then all of a sudden, one or two guys get on the subway car and they're looking around. And you can just tell they have, to a cop, it comes screaming out of them. This is a perp. And they're looking at everybody. They're looking for an opportunity, an open chain, a bag that's unlocked, some kind of opportunity. And I'll watch them because my eyes are going around. And at one point, our eyes meet. And they look at me and I look at them and I don't turn away. And then they look back and they realize, oh, okay, he's a cop. They know right away and I know who they are. It's 75 people in that subway car. And this little human drama is going on between me and these two perps. And nobody knows except me and these two perps. And they will undoubtedly, every time, get off at the next stop, but make sure they walk past me and go, "How you doing, officer?" And I would go, "Get out of here, beat it." And they get off the train. I can't tell you how many times that happened. That's because our job is to watch for the predators, to watch for the evil, so the rest of the world can live their life. And you also understand that people, even unless you're dealing with a pure sociopath, this is really, detectives have to learn this. A person who's done something heinous that is not necessarily how they live their life, or even if it is, it's really bad. When you bring them in, they're under so much internal stress trying to hold on to their well-rehearsed lie and trying not to let it out because they want to let it out. They want to relieve themselves of what happened and why they did it. It can be that they killed their girlfriend because they were in an emotional state, whatever it was. They don't want to let you know, but you can see them if you take your time and slow it down and talk, they physically start shaking. It's so much pressure and stress. And if you can get them to trust you, and if you can get them to believe that you understand them and that they're not a bad person, they will open up to you. And when they open up to you, what do, Tom? Put them in a cell and they fall asleep. They fall asleep because the relief of the pressure and stress was so enormous that their body passes out. And then when they wake up and meet their defense attorney in court, a new level of stress begins, which is the defense attorney says, "You said what?" Did they read you your rights and to tell you? It's the funniest thing is you have the right to remain silent, but not the ability. I'm telling you to shut up. The Supreme Court has told me I have to tell you to shut your mouth, but you're going to talk to me because you're stupid, because you think you can get away with it, and you think you can con me. And that was, I still laugh at how many people I read that to who go, I know my rights. Yep, I want to talk. There's an attorney somewhere going, shut up, duct tape, don't say anything. But that's human nature. When you understand, to understand how to be a good cop and detective is to have to understand human motivation, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all that good stuff, and a desire to be clean of something. And if they see that they can be clean, they have a little glimmer of hope, they will cooperate and they will fall right into it. And it's a trap. Right. It's a manipulation, but it's a game we're allowed to play, and we have to play on behalf of victims.
That is so interesting to me because, you know, if you think about how intellectually and physically and emotionally, you know, as human beings, we're such complex creatures and we're all tied in here together, but how much an emotional tired will affect you physically, you know, and that's, I think you're spot on, Dan, where, you know, that I think most people, unless they're so jaded, like those Chinese guys you were talking about, and unless, you know, MS-13, I think are the kind of the same breed where they're so deep into it. They've been so ingrained into the level of violence and inhumane acts and things like that. But I think 99% of humanity out there are good people. Mm-hmm. And when they commit a crime like that, it's just, they're just having the ultimate bad day, and whatever way they lashed out, I don't think that's natural for them. And so when they have that kind of act that's on their shoulders, it's like literally, you know, Atlas holding up the world, and the weight of it, I think, is so immense. And whether it's psychological or emotional, whatever it is, that they, like you said, they want to get rid of it. They want to be able to confess and tell somebody, and not in a braggart way, but just in a way that just, it actually expunges them. And whether that, you know, the consequences of telling somebody that obviously is less than the, you know, releasing that burden. And I just think, you know, it's like the little boy that steals, you know, the cookie out of the cookie jar after his mom told him not to. Most of the time, he, you know, when it comes down to it, even at a young age, he's like, yeah, Mom, I took it, you know, just to get right with the other people around him. And so that's just what I think that's one of the things that you guys master, and it's critically important when you're interrogating somebody in order to get that confession.
Give you one of the most classic examples of somebody, it's called leaking in certain ways too, of somebody who was so desperate to not admit, but to get what he could out. Our good friend O.J. Simpson, who just passed away, who wrote that incredibly misguided book, If I Did It, where he talks about how if he had done it, it would have went this way, and he thinks it went that way. It's a confession book. The whole book is a confession, without being a confession. He tried to walk that line. He was so desperate to get it out. He figured he'd write it under the guise of, well, if I did it, this is what I would. But he did. Everybody knows he did it. If you've ever read that book and you want to read delusion, self-denial, yet the desire to get it out at the same time, that confliction is all through that book.
Oh, that's, yesterday, well, you couldn't read anything else other than O.J. Simpson. And that was one of those wild things that everybody, I don't know what an inch. I can't think of anybody else that is remotely close to his experience level, because, you know, how many people were trying to defend him, and at the same time he's like living a lie that he knows he's living, that he's guilty, and yet because of the court system, being lenient on his celebrity status and everything else. He knows he should be in prison, but instead he's out playing golf. And I don't know. What do you think about that, Tom? I think that's a really interesting subject to delve into.
Yeah, probably in the history of crimes, there's not going to be more evidence against one individual than there was against him. But, you know, he had a defense team that took advantage of what they had. They spun it in a way that helped him, which is their job. I'll give them that.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone knows he's guilty. Got it. I'm just looking at it from a trial and courtroom presence. They just spun everything they could into a doubtful thought. And that's what got him off. The glove, whatever they could come up with, they spun it. But I remember that so vividly in watching the trial, and you're sitting there going, from coming from my perspective as a detective, going, there's no way he's not guilty. Between the blood, the DNA, his rage, that he would have, the cut on his hand that he broke on a glass in a hotel, airport. It's just none of it made sense. And I always say this: things come full circle at some point in life. It may take a while, it may take years, it may take decades, but at some point, evil gets taken care of. And he got locked up for the robbery. He got cancer. It's things happen. The man upstairs kind of has a Rolodex himself and kind of goes through and went, oh, OJ, okay. We're just gonna let him go through this for a while. But Dan's right. I mean, that book was such a opening up of what he did, and what a horrific crime in and of itself. Not only the crime itself, but the mother of his children, and then some poor guy who just happened to be there. And then to laugh about it, and then you had people backing him up, interviewing him, and laughing about it. It was a horrific time.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting things from a detective's point of view is, and Tom and I have talked about this, he gets called, your ex-wife was just brutally murdered in the home or in front of the home where your kids were. Oh my God. Oh, I'm getting on a plane right now. No, your wife is dead. Your wife is dead. Oh my God. Oh, I'm getting on a plane. He never asked how. The detectives noted, they were like, how? I never asked. That's the first. What the hell happened? Right? He never asked it. Second thing about him that I find incredibly fascinating, his defense team, of course, he builds the dream team, and they attack the DNA because it's still reasonably new technology, and they can confuse the jury. Forget about the fact that the jury, because they only spent like a lunch hour debating all this evidence, was obviously intent on doing what they were going to do from the beginning.
Yeah.
When you're a defense attorney and you have a rock solid case against you, you don't attack the case, you attack the detectives and the cops. When you have a case that has the slightest bit of a hole, you attack the case. In this case, they did everything they could to attack the cops because the case was too strong. They had to say, well, the evidence wasn't handled properly, and Mark Furman's a racist, and so he planted the glove. So that's why they spun those crazy theories, because it's to draw attention away from the fact that there's so much evidence that this guy did this.
So in your experience, when something like that happens, like particularly with one of your cases, typically does the prosecutor pick up on that and work then to defend against their attack, if that makes sense? If the case is solid and they start attacking the methods as opposed to the actual evidence, are prosecutors typically smart enough to alter their strategy and then present it in a different way?
Yeah, the talented ones, sure. The experienced ones, prosecutors, detectives, experience, all kind of comes together at some point, when it comes to a trial. And, The bad part about the O.J. Simpson trial is Marsha Clark and Chris Dowd were not the two best people in that office. And that's been noted. That's factual. They were not the most experienced. They were not the most revered, but they were chosen for specific reasons and which failed them. There were, talking to people who were involved, like Barry, Dan, there were much more experienced DAs in that office that should have been assigned to that case that weren't. But we've had numerous discussions with DAs when you start kind of game planning what the trial may be like. Hey, if this comes up, we're going to go this way. If this comes up, make sure you say this. Talented DAs who were real trial driven would always had the talent to kind of foresee defense attorneys. Hey, he's going to say this. Make sure you bring this out in your testimony. And it was like, okay, good. So you had a note of it, and sure as hell, you'd have a DA go, something, you go click, and you'd lay it out and give them nowhere to go. And those were the ones that were a pleasure to work with. That when you saw those names on the notifications, and you went, okay, good.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.